Welcome back. My name is Stephen. We're going to be in John chapter 4 today for this week's Friday Fruit. I have the privilege of teaching high school Bible, and we were just traveling through the book of John over the last couple weeks. And I think we're all familiar with John chapter 3 and the story or the account of Jesus and Nicodemus and their conversations together. We get some incredible scripture passages from there. John 3:16, 17, 18. And they are leaving that conversation, and you get to chapter 4, and then all of a sudden Jesus is taking the 12 disciples. They're traveling through Samaria, and they come across a well, and Jesus sends the disciples on into town to get some food. And Jesus has a very poignant conversation with the woman at the well, and he offers essentially the woman living water. The conversation is he's thirsty, and she says, "You have nothing to get water from the well." And he says, "But if you drink the water that I offer, you will never thirst again." And they have some conversation back and forth, and he points out some sin in her life and some things, calls that to her attention. And she says, "Well, you must be a prophet." And she says, they talk about worship, where the Jews say to worship, where the Samaritans say to worship. And there's some very poignant verses there about God looking for worshipers in spirit and in truth. And then she says, when the Messiah comes, he will explain it all. And he says, the person that you're talking about, I am he. And so she drops the water jars, and she goes back into town, and she goes to tell about Jesus and the conversation that they had. And the disciples come on the scene, and they see the end of that conversation where they see Jesus talking to a woman, which culturally was a no-no, and then racially a Jew talking to a Samaritan, so they're already on high alert there. And he'd sent them in to get food, and when they come back, they begin to ask questions, and Jesus says, "I have food that you know nothing about. My food is to do the will of God who sent me." And then he goes on to challenge the disciples to look at the fields because they are ripe for the harvest. And I think Jesus' push to his disciples, and that includes us too, is to look past our visual limitations. See, the disciples were consumed with the fact that he was talking to a woman. She was at the well when she wasn't supposed to be there. She was leading a promiscuous lifestyle. Jesus calls that out in her, and the disciples are just maybe put off a little bit by that. Then she's a Samaritan, so it's pushing against the grain of culture that they're so used to. And Jesus is calling those disciples, and I think us, to look past some things. That conversation with Nicodemus in chapter 3, he calls Nicodemus to look past the religious things that Nicodemus is so steeped in. And would he be born again? Would he follow Jesus? And then chapter 4 happens, and he's bringing out sin in the Samaritan woman at the well, and he's asking her to look past some of her own flaws and faults. She has to look past that because she's not liked, she's not regarded in the community. She's pretty much an outcast to the society, but yet she has a conversation with Jesus, and she goes back and looks past those physical limitations of her own flaws and her own sin to go and to say, "Hey, there's a guy out here that told me everything I ever did." And so she had to look past her own visual limitations. Nicodemus, he says in chapter 3, would you look past your own visual limitations? And then for the disciples. And so he's asking them to look past some things that they're seeing and have a perspective from him. Jesus' perspective. See, because he said, you did nothing, but you're going to reap a harvest which you did not sow. And so I think Jesus is sowing a harvest in our community and our culture around us. And I think he's looking at us asking, going, will you reap that harvest? And so it reminds me from John chapter 4, when he's asking them to look past what's right in front of them. It just reminds me of Matthew chapter 9, where he says this. He said to the disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest fields. Friends, I think the fields are ripe for the harvest. Jesus is doing the sowing, but he needs us to reap the harvest. So today, maybe I hope that helps you. I think maybe we should look past our visual limitations of what we see all the time. I think for us, we need to sit down and listen and have conversations. We need to do the great commandment, love God and love people. And I know sometimes that's difficult, but I think there's a harvest that He is calling us to reap. So I hope this encourages you today. Just remember, keep worshiping, and God bless.